We can also use physical trauma as a metaphor for emotional trauma. And I had a profound experience. I used to have a Vespa in San Francisco for years. And let me just say, having a Vespa in San Francisco comes with having some accidents. And there's just, at one point I realized this is not for me anymore. But I did have an accident. I broke 2 vertebrae in the top of my back. And during the healing, I started doing massage therapy. And the massage therapist, wonderful guy, Paul, he said, the vertebrae is healed, but the muscle around the vertebrae doesn't know it yet.
This is the Don't Hide the Scars podcast, presented by Pain, Parents and Addicts in Need. Jason LaChance here, and I am honored to be joined by my dear friend today, TJ Woodward. He's a revolutionary recovery expert, a best-selling author, an addiction treatment specialist. You've done it all, my friend, the creator of the Conscious Recovery Method, which I've think I've gotten through 2 books now so far. I know you're always working on more, and you're doing some beautiful work with podcast. I'm so excited you're in the space. Element Q podcast, available on YouTube and on audio podcast. Just search Element Q podcast. And that's actually what prompted this, because I was listening to a conversation you had with a licensed therapist, Melissa Stevens. It was just mind-blowing. And I said, we got to get a conversation in about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Love Melissa. We've worked together for years. I did love that conversation. And thank you, Jason, for having me on. I love our collaboration, and I'm really excited about wherever this conversation takes us.
Yeah, I want to dive into somatic therapy because I had so little knowledge around it. And that was a good amount of the basis of what you and Melissa discussed, because for so many people that have, if it's that struggle with alcohol and they're looking to live an alcohol-free life, or it's substances, or just we experience trauma. I mean, you and I firsthand, we kind of cover all those bases that I just discussed, but there is a way to change the way our nervous system responds.
Absolutely. And, whether it's somatic experiencing, which Melissa is very well versed in and studying, or any modality that helps us get in touch with what's happening, not just in the mind, but also what's stored in the body. And the easiest way to start the conversation is to ask the viewers and the listeners, have you ever been getting a deep tissue massage and suddenly an emotion comes up, or suddenly a memory pops up? That's the way memories, traumas get stored in the body, quite literally. And, in my own experience, I went to therapy this was, my early recovery in my early 20s. And my therapist wasn't a somatic experiencing therapist. He was an engaged Buddhist, but the concept was the same. What are you noticing in your body? And I remember saying to him, I don't know what you're saying right now. I was literally so in my head at that time and so disconnected from my body that it took me some time. And he would just say, just see if you feel any sensation anywhere as you're remembering this or as you're telling me this. And then he would say, put your hand on your heart and see what you're noticing. So there's a lot of different modalities that are helping us drop down, out of only being in our head, dropping down into our heart, the place of emotions, but even deeper than that, what's stored more deeply in the body.
Yeah, I know for me, I had an interesting experience in a breath work session with a buddy of mine, Sonny Mail, and just tears. And I hadn't cried in a long time, except for maybe a good movie or a book, but it just really had unlocked something. And I don't even know really what that story connected, that past issue, however we want to phrase that, was, but I know that I was feeling it in my body and it released.
Well, and that's what's fascinating, what you're saying, because we don't even necessarily have to attach it to a story. I think narrative therapy, which is basically like, let's just talk about what happened, see if you can connect the dots on the patterns. What was it like for you in your childhood? What did you decide about yourself? All of that is useful, but this is something much deeper. This is what's alive within you today. And the basis of my perspective on this is a quote from Bessel van der Kolk, and I love this quote. He says, trauma doesn't show up as a memory, it shows up as a reaction. That means when we're in reactivity, I've had the honor of working in the addiction treatment space for a long time. And when I was early in my work, I discovered something really simple. When someone was having an explosive reaction, it wasn't about the event at all. It was something much deeper because there was this significant reaction. And I would really lean in and say, "Isn't this wonderful?" They didn't always like hearing it, but "Isn't this wonderful you're having this big reaction?" Because we can start to unpack that and explore what's going on for you.
Yeah, and I know that that's really scary, but I've had in conversations with people that it's I would call it a sober blackout where they have that response. It's a major response, and then you ask them about the events of things and what happened. They're like, I don't remember. It's like, oh, and if you tell them, oh, that's a trauma response, like what? Like no, it is. Your nervous system took over. You went into a fight, flight, or freeze mode, and everything just played out, and the brain dumped any of the other information. But goodness, you feel it later.
Yep.
You feel it like think about like for instance, I've unfortunately been in a couple car accidents. One of them was pretty serious. I don't remember the events of that, but boy, I remember that pain, that
Yep.
physical pain.
It's interesting because physical trauma obviously is real, but we can also use physical trauma as a metaphor for emotional trauma. And I had a profound experience. I used to have a Vespa in San Francisco for years. And let me just say, having a Vespa in San Francisco comes with having some accidents. There's just, at one point I realized this is not for me anymore. But I did have an accident and I broke two vertebrae in the top of my back. And during the healing, I started doing massage therapy. And the massage therapist, wonderful guy, Paul, he said, the vertebrae is healed, but the muscle around the vertebrae doesn't know it yet. So it's still trying to protect something that actually isn't there. And my mind was blown because, yes, that's true physically. But of course, with me and my work, I'm like, how is that true emotionally and spiritually? What
Mm,
what happened, and we're reliving the event, and it's not usually consciously because when we're young, we have a traumatic event and we go into some kind of strategy. You named it, fight, flight, or freeze. Now we have fawn. There's a fourth one now, but just we'll stick with those three. That can become the automatic response when we have what we would call a triggering event. The reason, the reason that I don't use the word trigger is usually that means something outside of us, but there's
mm,
something getting touched. So, for example, in my case, my strategy automatic response as a kid to trauma was to go in my room, close the door, and go into fantasy. So in my early 20s, I would have intense experiences, variety of different types of intense experiences, and I would automatically start to kind of fade away, lose time, check out, numb out, all the different words we can use. And there was a period of time when I thought I shouldn't be doing that. But then I
mm.
became much more gentle with it, like to change that to, of course, I'm doing that. It's not even conscious. I just automatically freeze and check out. That is like those muscles around the vertebrae. The event itself actually isn't as unsafe as my response. That's one way we can see that if it's a trauma response, if it feels disproportionate to the actual event. My mom would look at me, someone would say something, a glance, and I would, ugh, and then I would freeze, right? And so that's the body trying to protect myself and trying to protect me from the trauma, but it's not even what's happening now. It was something from 20 years earlier.
Right. And let me ask you, is that from your understanding? I know you and I have spoken about this personally, never in anything of a shared public forum, but where I shared with you a lot of memory gaps from childhood.
Yeah,
But with that said, very familiar reoccurring responses within my body, the tightness of shoulder, neck, back,
yeah,
muscle aches, skeletal aches, all of these things. Is that it just a big, huge thing that is a part of the, I was recently reading The Body Keeps the Score. I need to go back through it again, but just, your work, it is all about bringing all this stuff into consciousness.
that's right. And
And go ahead.
what's interesting is We don't necessarily need to even know what happened. And I know that may sound counterintuitive for people and perhaps even a bit controversial. And I'm going to explain what I mean. When we're doing only narrative therapy, and that's just a really fancy way of saying when I'm trying to discover it through my mind only, what's the memory? And you talked about memory gaps. Memory gaps themselves don't necessarily mean there's trauma, but quite often it is, right? Because again, going back to the metaphor, the muscle around the vertebrae trying to protect it. So there's something in our psyche or in our bodies that's trying to protect something. And the key to this is that which we felt we could not experience as a young person. And the reason I say a young person is most of the significant trauma happens in early childhood. People say, well, why is that? It doesn't mean we all had these horrible childhoods. Some of us have obvious trauma. Some of us have more subtle trauma, but it's because the brain isn't even developed fully. A child, and I don't know a whole lot about the different stages of early childhood development, but I think it's between like 3 and 7. We're very concrete. If mommy's mad, I am bad. If daddy's not home, I'm unlovable. It isn't logical because the brain isn't even developed. The reason that's important is we get into therapy or recovery or a support group and we think we need to figure it out. And if I can just figure it out, I can be free. But it didn't even happen in the mind. It happened when we were so young and we couldn't feel that which needed to be felt. And we either shut down or we went into a flight, a fight, or a freeze response. And that becomes the automatic response. The way we heal it is to actually go back, not necessarily re-experience the trauma, but look at what is present in our bodies, like you said, Jason, as an information of what is still wanting to be healed.
I wanted to start this program because many months ago I was dealing with some veterans. I just didn't like the way they were being treated. I didn't like the services that were being provided, for the lack of a better term. I think we need to do a better job with our veterans, and in essence, that's why I decided to start this.
Tell me if I'm on course with this, at least aligned with your thinking. It makes sense that we would do that because it's especially the age that you mentioned, that phase of life. We don't we're not humans where it takes some time before we start to develop meeting our own needs.
Yeah.
And if those are the systems in which we grow up in, when it comes to that place of starting to develop, and as the brain heads towards maturity around 25, but if you're like maybe you and I, where substances were evolved, it was delayed quite a bit. It makes sense that we would continue to look towards external solutions of solving, for lack of a better word, solving what we see our problem as being, as opposed to realizing it's all within us. We are whole. We are complete. We can do this work to deal with these things so they don't continue to deal with us.
That's right. And what you're saying is really profound, because what happens is we have these traumatic events, and now trauma is the new buzzword and everything is trauma. So let's dive in a little bit. I like to use a pretty broad definition, and for some maybe that word doesn't even work. So let's say a significant event that happens in our life where we have something that happens in our bodies, our minds, and our hearts that we absorb and decide these massive things about ourselves. In my case, I decided I was unlovable, unworthy, not good enough. Those were the three that just kept repeating over and over again. And then, as you said, I got into my teenage years and then really in my 20s. Because I felt broken, I was looking to the world to fix something that felt broken through relationships. I was sober at that point. I got sober just before I turned 21, but there was still a lot of addictive tendencies, right? Let me shop, let me eat, let me just change the channel, let me go to 3 movies in one day, right? Anything I could do to not feel and not be present. And so the way we work with this deeper work is what's in the unconscious or the subconscious, and it really is about going back and holding our younger self and really allowing the younger self to actually process the trauma. Because if you look at an animal, if you see an animal that gets hit by a car, they shake, they literally shake it off. And obviously, if the incident isn't, life-threatening, they shake it off and then they walk away. They have an instinct to do that. But as little kids, we don't usually get the space for that. Usually we get things like go to your room till you can stop crying, take this piece of candy. I mean, I always say, no wonder we're so addicted. Every time I had a feeling, I was given a piece of candy, right? So the message, don't feel. And, it's not always true, but often true that for little boys, it's even more like boys don't cry, that message, at an early age. So we stuff it and we bury it. So of course we have this unresolved trauma living in our bodies.
Yeah, and it's not only the don't feel, but as you said, here's this external thing to soothe.
That's right.
I mean, and so for me, once it was like, oh, this horrible, terrible thing that I drink that tastes god awful, but if I choke down enough of it, then all of that kind of goes away. The delusion that it's gone away, that it's solved, the anxiety's gone, the depression, whatever. In that moment, it gets to a point where it moved to the front of my brain, where this was the conscious thought. And then eventually it just took over my whole entire system. So, with that said, how do we start to implement some of these practices? I mean, there's so many, through somatic therapy, movement, different practices to rewire our neural pathways. How do we start to really encourage folks to examine what they're feeling, bring awareness to it, and start to take these practices until they start to move from the front part of the brain to the back part of the brain, where it becomes the new modality, the new what they're being.
Yeah, a
Like,
new way of being. That's
yeah.
right. Because that's why we practice it, right? We're literally creating a new groove or a new neural pathway. We do that through behavior, and we do that even through consciousness self. How am I seeing myself? Before I dive into that, I wanted to speak to what you were saying about looking for the externals for relief, because I've worked with a lot of people, and there's someone in my life right now who said, well, I don't smoke weed because I have trauma or depression or sadness. I smoke weed because I like it. Right. So at an early, or maybe I would say less conscious, it's not a judgment. We wouldn't say it's better to be 30 years old than it is to be 12. They're just different stages of development. So when we're in that stage, we might not be able to draw a connection between the externalization and the issue. It's not like I was walking around when I was 15 and 16 saying, Jason, I feel so damaged and broken and feel unworthy, and I have so much unresolved trauma. I wish there was something. Oh, well, look, here's alcohol. That helps. Someone gave me weed. I smoked it. Oh my gosh, I felt relief, right? So it doesn't even necessarily begin to be something we explore until it causes consequences. And the old school model is, well, you're just going to have to lose everything and hit bottom in order for you to know how bad your life is. But I think there's a new way of seeing it now. And if we can be gentle with someone and say, well, tell me more about how that helps you. Tell me more about how it feels when you smoke weed. Tell me how it feels when you don't. This person in my life said, I don't have a problem with weed. I could stop at any time. And what I wanted to say with my old school thought is, yes, and you haven't tried that for about 5 years because every day you smoke weed, right? That's that old school thing, like, But instead I said, oh, well, tell me more about how it feels when you don't use weed, right? And so that's just one thing I wanted to just point out, because someone watching or listening might be saying, well, these things I do it's not an issue. It just feels good. Working in treatment, people are like, I don't have an addiction. I just enjoy drinking. So how do we actually start to do this deeper work? It always, to me, starts with safety. In conscious recovery, in my model, I identify the first important step in breaking the cycle of addiction as creating safety. And when we think about safety, we often think of it externally, just like we were talking. And I think that's usually important for people in the beginning. That's why we go to treatment. That's why we go to a support group. That's why we go to therapy, right? If we can find a safe person or a safe group of people where we can actually slow down enough to start looking at some of this, because I have this very simple idea, and I think it's simple is really powerful. The number one relapse prevention tool for anyone in recovery, you know what I'm talking about, is simply to be with ourselves because we've been running from the experience of now for so long. That's why for me, like I remember in my early recovery being introduced to chanting. I went to see this guru and like her love and her presence and the energy in the room and the vibration of the music. I just started sobbing, just like sobbing, sobbing, sobbing. And it's because I slowed down enough to allow that stuff to come up. That's why yoga is a great practice. Of course, in the United States, we think it's a physical exercise. That's not actually what yoga is, but it engages the body, and engaging the body can be useful. You mentioned breath work, absolutely. Sound healing, being with a great therapist who doesn't try to fix you, but just holds a space and asks you questions. These are the beginning steps because if we're doing this, right, if we're constantly nervous and our nervous system, again, that muscle trying to protect the vertebrae, we're not going to actually start looking beneath that. So safety is my answer in a nutshell.
Yeah, which I mean, it makes so much sense. It's I know, you, me, folks that we've worked with very much had that state of growing up potentially in an unsafe environment, or then subsequently, I know speaking personally, definitely kept putting myself in unsafe environments, unloving environments, because back to the stories we tell ourselves, that's what I deserved.
That's right.
And I found the more I connect and build friendships with folks such as yourself, where I know I'm safe to maybe even stumble over my words, say something that maybe came out inappropriate but wasn't meant to, and there's not a space of judgment, that I'm still seen, heard, and loved, allows me to continue to do that work in loving myself first and letting that flow out.
Absolutely. And it's both and, right? Because we create external safety and internal safety. So it almost sounds paradoxical because you and I are saying like we're looking to the world to try to fix ourselves and that doesn't really work. But then we find safe people to help us heal. So like in a way, yes, the external is important. And to me, it's both and. It's finding safe environment, safe relationships. There's this whole thing in our culture now about safe space. And what safe space has become is we just need to not disagree. But that's not actually a safe space. That, if anything, that's a stifled space, right? It's an inauthentic space. I see a lot of people learning what to say and how to say it so that no one calls them out, right? We're living in this heightened sense. It's actually, I think, a collective trauma response. If we come together and we create enough connection and authenticity where you and I, Jason, can sit down and talk about things. Tell me what it's like in your life with this. Tell me, that's true safety, where we can actually ask the difficult questions and really hold someone. And so it is external and it is internal. And I think ultimately true safety comes from within. But boy, did those relationships and people in my life and support groups really aid me in that. Without that, I don't know if I could have done the inner work. So there's the paradox.
New Perceptions North, the premier drug and alcohol treatment and recovery center in Central California. A full continuum of medically supervised top quality care with programs for detox and patient residential treatment with dual diagnosis, intensive outpatient treatment, sober living support groups, and more. New Perceptions North provides adult men and women with the highest caliber of professional health care, treating each client with compassion and respect, in a safe, comfortable environment to begin the process of recovery to proudly create and sustain a life without addiction. Call 559-978-1507 or visit newperceptionsnorth.com. And I know exactly what you mean, having had situations where seeing this, person A might say something, person B, it's a response, and the response is I never thought of it like that. It's, quote unquote, like a trauma type of response as opposed to, and what I love about your work and where conscious recovery was great for me to read, was that idea of curiosity and exploration.
Yeah.
Like your life and my life so different, and yet we've never had a conversation where it's been, boy, that's over. It's like, ooh, to be continued. Like we're gonna have to do this. This is like too much time being taken up, and for me, that's become that joy because it's really connected to that inner child in me, the curiosity, getting back to simple joy, simple pleasure, a really rewarding way of doing life, an empowering way of doing life, as opposed to the disempowering.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is so important for our society today. We
Yeah.
come into the world and we don't have the isms, right? We don't separate ourselves based on our religion or our skin color, all the things, sexual orientation, gender. But we get taught all of that, and then that becomes an identity. And when we have trauma that's unresolved, it's very easy to externalize it. And the externalization sounds something like this: I need the world to do things a certain way so that I can be safe. And I think it's an important part of the development, actually. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. But what we're pointing to, or what I hope we're pointing to, is to go to the next level with that. And that is, as I do enough of my own healing, I can be more available. And like, I don't need to find a group of like-minded people. And so let me break that down very simply. When we were earlier in our development, we lived in caves. And if we went outside of the cave, we might be eaten. We had to create a tribe of people in order to survive. That became part of the DNA, and then that gets passed down. We're studying this now that we change DNA over generations. And so this becomes an automatic, I need to find my people to feel safe. And unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, fortunately, it can help us feel really safe. Unfortunately, it's not true safety, right? It's not ultimate safety. And if I remember that I came into the world as a whole and perfect being, and that really much of this world, much of this life, whether it's recovery or therapy or wellness, is about unlearning and returning to that place of openness and curiosity. Then I don't really need a group of like-minded people in order to feel safe. I want to engage with people who are dedicated to this level of authenticity. I'm thinking of a few friends. We didn't vote the same. We don't have the same points of view. We don't feel the same about guns. I mean, I could name so many different things. I remember, someone telling me, "Oh, this person's not going to like conscious recovery because they're Christian." And I thought, well, that's a very interesting thing to say, right?
Yeah.
And I said, "Tell me more." Because I often do. Well, I mean, you're a gay man and she's a Christian, so she isn't going to accept this. Isn't that an interesting assumption that all Christians must not accept? We have these things that we have decided, and then this is the controversial statement of the day. When we only live in these echo chambers, that narrative becomes intensified.
Mhm.
And then we are afraid, I'm going to put it in the I, then I'm afraid to have a differing point of view than the entire system. And if I question something, I might get thrown out of the tribe.
Right.
This is very base. It feels very like to the core of like, ooh, I better acquiesce to this, or I better not say how I really think, what I really feel. And that then creates automatic division in the world because then we automatically other people. And quite frankly, the world's most horrific events have come from that. It almost is so simple, but then it's like, well, how do we unravel this, right? You
Yeah.
named it. Stay curious. Remember, I didn't come into the world with all these judgments. I'm not saying we don't have opinions.
Mhm.
What I am saying is if I believe I am my opinions, and the only way to say be safe is to surround myself with people who agree, I'm going to naturally feel less safe and I'm going to naturally other. And that is where the issues that we see happening in the world that have always been happening, but now we have social media to see it in a more pronounced way.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up because, as you're talking about this, I've shared a personal situation where an individual dear friend, all of a sudden, because of this person's perception of who I am that they've known for 30 years, I think it is now. It's like I didn't even get to have a conversation. There was no conversation. It's just you're over there. It's like, my goodness, you don't know like who I am. Like, how have you missed in knowing me for so long and seeing the progress of my life and knowing me through addiction and coming out on the other side, like all these assumptions, like what happened to being the kids that were just in the park and was like, oh wow, Timmy's got the new GI Joe figure,
Right.
Jason's got the new Star Wars figure. Oh, that's cool. What, how do you play? What, it's like, where did that go? And I would have to just say like, yeah, that danger of social media. I mean, Melissa Stevenson on your latest episode of Element Q, I just love what she shared about the idea of, you go home and you might doom scroll on social media. And I was like, put my hand up while I'm watching this on the Element Q podcast YouTube channel. I'm like, yeah. And she's like, go back through your camera roll and just look at happy memories. I'm like, oh my God, there it is. And it is a lot of danger, and it really does divide us. It captivates us. It holds us, and the algorithm. If you spend that time on video type X, well, that's what you're going to keep getting more of. I was talking with a young man who was struggling through his recovery with he's like, I'm tired of seeing, why does my feed, like I get every girl dancing in a bikini and all this, like that's a part can very much connected to his substance use issues too. And is like, well, stop looking at it.
Yeah.
Don't stop down on it. Matter of fact, start searching for different things. Start searching whatever you're curious about. Start searching for those joys. Like my feed, it is all recovery stuff, Star Wars, Disneyland, Marvel, all that stuff. Like I have been able to curate it to what I'm interested in. Now, some stuff does sneak in, but
Yeah.
I swipe pretty quick and get away from it. And it
That's
is
right.
my responsibility.
That's right. And the great news is we have the power to change it. And you're leaning into something that I gave a talk one time called consciousness is an algorithm.
Mhm.
Someone really did not like that on social media, and she schooled me on what consciousness is and what an algorithm is. And I said, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Because what we click on, we get more of. What we focus on grows, whether we're for it or against it. So if I'm like hating a public figure and I'm going to get more of that figure in my news feed. If I'm clicking on love and light, I'm going to get more love and light. I can watch, the cat videos. There are a couple things that are important, I think, to bring into the conversation. We understand, at least on some level, that what we feed ourselves, garbage in, garbage out, period, right? Hate in, hate out. So if I am constantly we have decided that the news is the horrific things happening on Earth. Isn't that interesting? We all just decide, oh yeah, that's right. News is everything horrible happening on Earth. Well, for every one thing that we would call horrible happening on Earth, there's a million things happening that are beautiful. But we don't call that news because we've been programmed. And so we have the power to change the news feed. And someone said to me, and I loved this actually because it allowed me to be curious. If you were so enlightened, you could see all that and not get hooked. And I sat with that. That's true. And if I'm so enlightened, I could drink poison and not die. But I'm not going to choose to test that today because I don't like the effect of drinking the poison. So, am I burying my head in the sand? Maybe. But the point is, we believe that we're supposed to digest this information and we have no power to change it to start with. Yes, we vote. Yes, we do the things. But ultimately, in that moment, we are actually poisoning ourselves. And I will use that very clearly.
Mhm.
We are poisoning ourselves, and then I will see the world through that lens. So I cleaned up my news feed by very simply, I didn't need to unfriend anyone. And it wasn't political. It was about I unfollowed the people who were putting out the stories of division, the stories of fear, posting all the horrible things happening on the earth. My friend Michael Beckwith says the news is not the news, it's the olds. It's the same old story we've been telling over and over and over again. If you want something new, have a new thought. Have a new perspective, have a new thing you focus on. And so we can actually change the algorithm. And I mean, if you want to see an algorithm that's aggressive, it's TikTok. You only have to do it for about 5 minutes and it's changed,
Mhm.
right? The other ones are a little slower, but that's life. So if I'm in the fight, if I'm in the resistance, if I'm in the ussing and themming, I will continue to experience more of that. Why is it important? It's painful.
Yeah.
And when I am in that pain, I'm in the fight. And if I'm in the fight, I'm going to look for something outside of myself to bring relief. We could talk about the issue for so long, but let's talk about the flip side. The more I focus on connection and love and openness and curiosity, the more I experience it in the world. What I digest becomes my life experience, period.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's all about asking a better question than looking for something just to reiterate already the beliefs that you have. You and I have had such different spiritual journeys that like I would be a fool not to sit and be like, wait a minute, you went where and sat with who? Like that would be a big waste of time in my perception to sit there and try to go, well, I could solve all your problems. And I think some ways at times it's almost still as if I was in my addiction, like playing a god to
Yeah.
certain extents if I do that to people, like to negate any of your life experience or anybody else's and not have good questions and not have, a sense of vulnerability and a willingness that like, ooh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say something that wasn't my intent to set you off there. I was, kind of exploring this with you. And I think it's just such a beautiful part of growth. Like I want to be as peaceful as possible inside for as much of my day as possible. Like I can't guarantee what's going to happen in the world. Power
Right.
goes out, this goes out, that goes out. An unexpected bill. All these things. It's just life. It's just life stuff.
Yeah. And the important piece is, to me, the important next part of the conversation is we might think we're unplugging from the world and not helping the world, but the truth is unplugging from that world of divisiveness and of polarization, and tuning into something that's more loving and open actually does start to create not only a ripple effect, but it changes consciousness on the planet. So like it is actually very, very useful to unplug from that, not just for my own sense of well-being, because like I said, some people are like, oh, you're just going to bury your head in the sand. Well, I mean, first of all, if the alternative is to continue to digest all of these stories of division, I'll take the sand. Let's start with that. But the truth is, we can actually make a bigger difference when we're not in the fight. And I was in San Francisco in the early '90s during the ACT UP days, and like people were throwing chairs through the window. And I understand the rage, I understand the anger. It's a part of the process, but possibly that anger, that rage, the divisiveness, but we can evolve and we have the ability to evolve, but no one's going to do it but me. And
Mhm.
that is, I think, it took me 40 years to figure that out. I mean, Carl Jung says we spend the first half of our life developing an ego and the second half of life dismantling it. And that has been true for me because by the time I hit 40, I'm not saying I'm only going to live to 80. I probably will live a lot longer than that. But let's just say that's sort of near halfway. My nephew, when he was a kid, I was 37. He called me middle-aged, and I said, "Ah, I am not middle-aged." And he said, well, actually, I was 42 because I said, I'm not middle-aged. He said, 42 plus 42 is 84. I'm like, oh, wow. Um, but this dismantling is really just like, oh, all of these identities I've taken on that I thought were keeping me safe no longer are needed or required. What I really want is love and connection. And I remember, Jason, being in early recovery, and I was terrified of straight men. I mean, I'm not saying a little bit of fear. I accidentally, I was in 12 step at the time. I accidentally walked into a men's meeting and I started shaking. Right. And it was so easy for me to project all my stuff onto what they were doing. But the truth is, they were just wanting to love and accept me. There were some who didn't, but that was a different era. It was the 1980s, but there were plenty who did. And being able to do enough of my own healing, and that's why I say it's a trauma response, right? This group of people should, and I get it. I've lived it. And maybe I'm in the second half of dismantling phase, but it's so much more comfortable. We don't have to wait until we're 40 to start dismantling. We can do it now.
Well, and the interesting thing about you sharing that is you walk in there with fear, and whomever rejected you, it was also fear.
That's right.
And fear can be a really strong thing to ever prevent an individual and a collective from doing good conversation and questioning and willing to explore and open your mind to these things. And you know, how you brought up, you know, maybe divisive cultures and, well, how do I want to word this? Yeah, like a situation of where individuals choose to riot. It's like, my thing is I hope people that if there is some sort of inkling to do so, that they can kind of take a look and go, yeah, if I do that, then I'm kind of letting that other perspective win, for lack of a better term. Like I'm fulfilling exactly what they say about me. And I don't know. I'm kind of big on like people going, yeah, you, before I met you, I thought you were kind of an a-hole. Now I kind of like you, you know, which is
Right.
fine. I'd rather you like me, care about me, or don't, please, because that's how I'm going to be as well. It's okay to have a discern, you know, to discern who you do and do not wish to associate with, but at the same time, be willing to have that dialogue, at least to understand that each individual comes from an individual standpoint. Like we can't just lump everybody into a section.
Right.
It's harmful. It's
Well, and
incredibly harmful.
it's so interesting to me because as you were talking, I was reflecting on like my closest circle of friends. And, you know, 20 years ago, my closest circle of friends all agreed with me. Like we had the same thoughts, we had the same points of view. And I can honestly say that I'm so grateful that that's not true in my circle of friends now. And that almost sounds um, like heresy in some circles. What do you mean you have friends who don't agree with you? But what I do, who I am surrounded by are people who are dedicated to love and connection, who are dedicated to being curious, who are dedicated to, you know, moving beyond the polarization of my ideas about myself so that I can truly connect. And, you know, and with that, you know, a lot of people agree on a lot of things in my close circle, but then some of them, it's like, oh, wow, we really don't have the same point of view about that. And it's totally okay. And if anything, the way we can like actually come together and be curious about each other's point of view, it doesn't start with hostility. So I'm more willing to hear the other person's point of view. Oh, it feels so good to be in this conversation. I just want to say it feels very refreshing. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's nice for us to be able to have the conversation. Everything, you know, this is more like a catch up for us because it tends to be around work and me. Let's be honest to the listener here. It's usually about me asking for your knowledge, which that will continue. So it's nice to just have some dialogue around it. How do we? Let's close on, you know, those new through their journey, be it aiming to live an alcohol-free life or substance or whatever it is. What really in that first 30 days is some of the work that you do to try to help the individual move away from that subconscious story, that subconscious way of being?
Well, it's such an interesting question because the truth, Jason, is I don't find myself working with people in their first 30 days at this
Mm.
point because most of my work is training clinicians, and training is really providing experiences for people who are on the front lines to be more available and open and present. So I just want to name that because I think what a person needs is to be seen and heard. I think what a person needs is to feel safe. And so I was kind of hearkening back to working in treatment, 48 bed facility, lots going on. And what was the most important thing? I was the person that they called in when someone was emotionally dysregulating, just having a feeling, having an explosive feeling, losing their blankety blank, we could even say. And I knew two things. One, what they're upset about is not what they're upset about. I wonder what it is. Two, I'm going to see the wholeness and perfection in this person rather than negotiating with the upset, not
Mm.
dismissing the upset, but just looking for something beyond that. So I guess I'm answering your question in a roundabout way because in my first 30 days, what did I really need? I needed to feel safe. I needed people to hold me. Like I remember I'm thinking back to the first 30 days and I was just so afraid. And I didn't know the extent of my fear until I started to unravel it months and years later. But I was just on guard, just so restricted and tight and afraid. And the people who saw me And just, to say non-judgment is almost like the understatement, but just to see something that I had lost sight of, I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Community, connection, seeing someone for who they really are beyond the behaviors, that's really the most important thing.
Absolutely. If people want to know, well, let's just tell them a little bit more about the work you're doing now with the Element Q podcast, and then how people can connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Element Q podcast is the new podcast. It's connected with Element Q Healing Center, which I'm a partner, a co-founder of, which is LGBTQ focused treatment, PHP, IOP in San Diego. Hard to imagine it's the first one in San Diego County that's specifically offering mental health care for the LGBTQ plus population. The podcast is really a conversation about how we can do the deeper healing. My work obviously isn't exclusively to LGBTQ folks. Conscious Recovery is my book. I have Conscious Creation, but I do a lot of things, but it's all going down to one core principle, and that is regardless of what has happened in our life and regardless of what we've done, we are a whole and perfect spiritual being. So everything I do points to that.
Absolutely. And I encourage anyone, I don't want them to go, oh, I'm not part of the LGBTQ plus community, I'm not going to listen to it. No, they're insightful conversations. You had one, why am I drawing a blank on Patrick's last name?
Patrick Lockwood.
Patrick Lockwood
Yeah.
on body image issues. Hey, that hand up me. So they're just wonderfully valuable conversations. I mean, the beautiful Temple Hayes, who I met through you, I just love an Adore's pin on there. Christina Simos, I mean, just a wonderful lady who I met at your conference. So they're just wonderful conversations. So I definitely encourage people to just go. Give it a listen. Keep an open mind. You're going to learn something. These are beautiful, brilliant people who've found their talents, their abilities, their heart, their compassion, their love, and spread it out to other people. So please go give it a listen. All social media links are at TJ Woodward, correct?
Yep, tjwoodward.com.
Yeah.
So if you go to my website, you'll see the social. A lot of my social links are TJ Woodward _. Someone beat me to them, but that's okay.
All right. We'll point people to tjwoodward.com. I appreciate you, my friend, and I love you.
Thank you. I love you too, Jason. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you for listening to Pains Don't Hide the Scars podcast or watching on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@PainNonprofit.